Welcome back, everyone, to another reaction video, and today we are returning to a channel that I know many of you love as much as I do, and that is Sam Onella Academy. We're going to take a look at another one of his videos today. We're going to be looking at some historical misconceptions for you to talk during family dinner. I've put a link in the description to the other videos of his that I have reacted to in the past, so you can check those out, as well as the link to the original content that he created. Make sure you go over and check it out and give him a like if you would. If you like what you see here, please consider subscribing to this channel as well. Tomorrow we will be getting back to looking at the last few videos in the Turkish Century series, looking at the history of Turkey and the Ottoman Empire. So that'll be coming back tomorrow. Also, some more information about my trip, which is now just a little over a week away, to Vicksburg, and what'll be coming with that. So be watching for that. Make sure you turn on your notifications so you don't miss it. Let's dive in.
This episode of Sam Onella Academy is brought to you by Skillshare. Hey kid. Yeah, you. I just got off the phone with the big man upstairs, and he told me that I need to clear a few things up around here. So without further ado, here's 10 pieces of malarkey that you might still be spreading. Number 1. Nobody was ever burned to death at the Salem witch trials. Of the accused, 15 died in prison, 19 were hanged, and 1 was squished to death. That last one is way more interesting than any cremation, by the way. Dude was a badass. His name was Giles Corey. He was 81 years old and so done with the town of Salem's garbage that he wouldn't even dignify the trial with a plea. So the town stuck him between 2 boards and stacked rocks on top of him in an effort to draw out a confession. But every time they tried to get something out of him, all he would say was, "More weight." This went on for 3 solid days until he finally died, never giving any indication as to whether or not he was a witch. One can only wonder.
So there's a couple things about Giles Corey. Number 1, he was 81 years old. I mean, and this just, it's a fascinating study to look into the Salem witch trials and how mass hysteria grows. I mean, it's a perfect case study in mass hysteria, how it starts, with a couple of teenage girls in a town in a time when this kind of thing, this kind of accusation was taken really, really seriously. But there's a reason, first of all, that he doesn't plead either way, because pleading guilty, first of all, if you're sincere in your faith as a Christian, to admit to something like witchcraft was a pretty serious thing and not something that should be taken lightly. But to plead innocent then meant that you would end up being found guilty and executed by hanging, as they executed the others. But they also would take your property if you were found guilty. And so there was actually a method to his madness in not pleading either way. He deprived them of the ability to find him guilty, but also to end up taking his property, and he wasn't going to plead guilty. And so he basically put them in a position where they had no choice. I think it might have actually been doors rather than boards. I could be wrong about that, but I think it might have been 2 doors he was between, or at least the door on top, and then they just kept piling the rocks. But yeah, that is a total bad you-know-what move to say more weight when they're slowly pressing you to death like that. And there were hundreds more people who could have died if a judge hadn't stepped in and put a stop to the whole thing when he did.
Number 2, the OG Buddha wasn't the obese guy. That's Budai, a Chinese folk character meant to represent Maitreya, aka future Buddha. Now this shirt is double sad. Number 3, Buddha wasn't a god either. He was just a guy named Gautama. Now this shirt is triple sad. Number 4. Ever heard of a vomitorium? Turns out no, it's not a place where Roman nobles would go to make room for more pheasant spleen and lobster eyelids. It's just a big entranceway to the Colosseums that hordes of peasants would spew out of.
So, I mean, you get that, how that could end up being misconceived in people's minds, but it does kind of work as far as the the imagery of that, right? I mean, if you've ever been to a big sporting event, my boys and I went to see the Columbus Crew the other day at their new stadium, and it was just this huge horde of people. It took us like 20 minutes to get the quarter mile to our car just because of how many people were all going out of the same exit at the same time, and it does really have that imagery of, vomiting out large numbers of people.
5. Washington never cut down a cherry tree in his youth. I don't get this one at all. Apparently it's supposed to paint the man in a good light somehow. It's like, Tyler, what the hell happened while we were gone? Where's the tree in the front yard? Oh yeah, that was me. Got bored. Just felt like vandalizing something,
With any famous person who becomes almost like a cult-like status, this mythological status like George Washington, there are going to be all these imageries that people have of him. The wooden teeth, for example, which he never had. Usually people's false teeth at that time were made from dead people or from animal teeth, and they were kind of strung together. And we actually have some of Washington's teeth, so we know what they were made of. In fact, he had a set of false teeth, I think, that were made by Paul Revere at one point. The whole chopping down a cherry tree and then owning up to it because he didn't want to be caught in a lie. Well, first of all, Washington's father died when he was like a really small child. I want to say he was less than 10 years old. So this idea of like a adolescent George Washington owning up to his dad about what he had done couldn't happen because his dad wasn't even alive at that point. But and throwing the silver dollar across the Delaware River or something like that. I don't even know where some of this stuff comes from, but we have those kinds of stories about all of our kind of mythological historic figures, the ones that rise way above. Abraham Lincoln's another one. People that we don't even really see as human beings sometimes, to the point where when they're portrayed as a complete kind of complex person in film or in TV shows, it's almost like a disappointment because people are like, wow, really? That's Washington? But those are some of the best portrayals. The portrayal of George Washington in Turn, Washington Spies, portrays him as a very normal human being with flaws and fears and doubts and kind of doing stupid things sometimes. And that's who George Washington really was.
Hey, what about my honest character? Number 6, the pyramids weren't actually built by slaves. These workers were respected members of society. They ate meat and worked in 3-month shifts, and even got to be buried right next to the tomb after their death.
I don't know, maybe somebody who's more familiar with Egyptian history can set the record straight on this one in the comment section, but was it all the workers who got to be buried in those? I know in those complexes, like by the Great Pyramid, there's that massive complex. I thought maybe it was just the head engineers and people who helped, like the leaders, not like literally every worker. But maybe I'm wrong about that.
Matter of fact, that's more than we can say for the people working on man's greatest achievements today. If I spent years of my life helping to build the space station, you're damn right I'd want the Salmonella Memorial Corpse Receptacle floating along right next to it.
The Salmonella Memorial Corpse Receptacle. Now, what's cool is they actually, a while back, had a thing where you could have a small amount of your ashes launched into space. I think they did that with Gene Roddenberry, the guy who created Star Trek. I think they sent some of his ashes up into space like that. Cool thing about the pyramids, though, and this kind of gives you some perspective on history. Maybe you've heard this before. Cleopatra, who was kind of considered to be like the last pharaoh of Egypt, even though she was more Greek than Egyptian, it's closer to modern times, like today, than she was to the building of the pyramids in terms of history. We were talking about this on one of my on the podcast I was on with Pure Kino the other day, how to the Romans, the ancient Egyptians were as ancient as the Romans are to us. I mean, that's how long ago those pyramids were built, and that's what an incredible feat that was for as long ago as it was.
That would be amazing. Number 7, the Great Wall of China is not the only man-made object visible from space. I don't know where you dipshits got this one from. First of all, there's no way you could see it with the unaided eye. The wall is like 30 meters thick at most, while the distance to outer space is generally recognized to be 100 kilometers up, known as the Kármán line. To give some perspective, that's like me holding up a standard-sized guitar pick from across the entire length of a football field and asking you what color it is. Also, there are plenty of man-made objects that are way bigger in terms of local surface area than the Great Wall.
Yeah, perfect example right there. A Home Depot parking lot is easily more visible from space than the Great Wall of China would be. I really don't understand where that one came from either. I don't know why anybody ever said that with any kind of like legitimacy whatsoever. He's right. There's so many objects that are so much more massive than the Great Wall of China. And the Great Wall of China is not even one wall. It's actually a series of walls, some of which are not even connected to each other, that make up kind of a complex of walls. It's not just one long wall from one end to the other.
So even if it was visible, there's no way it would be the only one. Number 8, you might have heard this one before. You know, Hitler was a jerk and all, but hey, he made the Autobahn, so at least he was efficient. Actually, Hitler didn't create the Autobahn. It was already there. He just helped expand it into newer territory. In a similar vein, Mussolini didn't make the trains run on time, with most of Italy's infrastructure repairs happening before his rise to power in 1922.
And here's what I don't understand about any of that. What's it matter? I mean, so even if it were true that he helped create the Autobahn, it doesn't excuse the fact that he's responsible for the deaths of tens of millions of people between the Holocaust and other atrocities in the wars itself. It doesn't excuse any of that stuff. You know, it's not like, you know, we're going to remember him more for that. You know, for example, there are a lot of historical figures who have some really big negatives about them. You know, I could speak of Thomas Jefferson and say, hey, you know what? He owned slaves, bad. He hired a guy named James Callender to, you know, put him on the government payroll, while simultaneously using that guy to undermine the very government that he was supposed to be working for. And then Callender dies under really mysterious circumstances right before he goes to testify against Jefferson. It's not like, you know, we remember him more for those things than for the fact that he wrote the Declaration of Independence and he was a 2-term president, first Secretary of State. You know, he did all those great things. But in context, let's also talk about some bad stuff too. Okay, it's good to talk about both. George Washington, great man, did great things, father of our country, also owned slaves, also did some pretty shady things in terms of his dealings with freed slaves after the Revolution, stuff like that. It's good to talk about both. But he's primarily going to be remembered for the good things. Hitler is always going to be primarily remembered for the deaths of tens of millions of people in mass genocide and war. So what if he also happened to do this nice little thing on the side?
And even then, they weren't nearly as punctual as he'd like you to believe. So unfortunately, you're gonna have to find something else to like about these fascists. Like Hitler's elegant way of speaking. Or the way Mussolini says spaghetti. Paschetti! Number 9, Iron Maidens weren't actual torture devices used in medieval times.
Made up.
Basically what happened is, some archaeologists in the 1800s saw an old metal coffin and some spikes, and said, yo, wouldn't it be wildin' if we put these things up in here, so that way if someone goes in it, they get poked in their bits? You are a sick man, Cornelius.
You know what this reminds me of? I don't know if you've ever seen, I don't even remember what it's called, but it's like these llamas, and the one llama like does these horrible atrocities, and then he's like real nonchalant about it afterwards. Like, you know, like he eats children and eats hands and causes a nuclear holocaust to take place somewhere and sinks a cruise ship and kills all the people on board. And I don't even remember what it's called. Somebody help me out with that one, but it reminds me of that kind of sick humor. But that's basically what this was. It was completely made up fabrication. And we have a lot of stuff like that are modern forgeries or modern things that people make up that they try to point to being real, but they weren't. You know, another one, not really history, but in terms of food. Most of the food that we get at a Chinese food place here in America, like fortune cookies, not Chinese at all. Invented in the United States. I don't know why we call them Chinese food. They're not.
I like it. Into the museum it goes. At least Iron Maiden was real. They were as real as it gets. Still are. And don't you forget it. Number 10, Einstein never failed math.
Nope.
He had mastered both integral and differential calculus by the age of 15. 99% chance this one was just made up to make glue eaters feel better about themselves. Well, congratulations, Dimitri. Looks like you failed pre-algebra for the 3rd time. Brady still can't graduate. Well, hey, that means I'm still on par with famous smart science man, so, yeah, worship me.
Now, that said, there are some good examples of people who failed something only to be excellent at it later. Michael Jordan did get cut from his high school basketball team before going on to superstardom in college and obviously in the pros. The Beatles did very famously get told by a record label that guitar music was on their way out, and they weren't very good. I think Charles Schultz was another example. Walt Disney, people who ended up being the people maybe most remembered for their craft, being told that they were no good in that craft. So that does happen. So we don't need to point to Einstein as an example of that. There are plenty of other fantastic options. Abraham Lincoln, with the exception of one term in the U.S. House of Representatives, and I think maybe some local elections at the state level, lost every election he was in, including losing to Stephen Douglas for the Senate race in Illinois, only to turn around and beat the same Stephen Douglas in the presidential election a couple years later. So there's some great examples of failures becoming successful without having to make one up.
So it just goes to show that we've all got a lot to learn about the world around us. That's why you need to go to Skillshare.
Skillshare is an online learning community with over 20,000 classes
I use it. It's fantastic.
Design, business, and more.
Premium membership gives you unlimited access to high-quality classes on must-know topics so you can improve your skills, unlock new opportunities, and do the work you love. They've got great courses in graphic design and animation, which I've clearly already mastered. I mean, check this out. But I'm sure you could get a lot of use out of them. You can also learn plenty of more recreational skills, like how to solve a Rubik's Cube, or how to play chess really well. Join the millions of students already learning on Skillshare today, with a special offer just for my viewers, where you can get 2 months of Skillshare completely free.
To sign up, go to skl.sh/samo. Again, go to skl.sh/samo. to get 2 months of unlimited access to over 20,000 classes for free.
Act now for this special offer and start learning today. Anyway, till next time, I'm Salmonella, and thank you for watching.
All right, so that's the end of that one. I hope you guys enjoyed that. Let me know yours as well. Use the comment section below. What are some other historical myths that people have always believed, or that you grew up believing that you later found out was not true at all and just blew your mind when you found out it really wasn't a thing? Use the comment section below. If you have other ideas for reaction videos you'd like me to take on, let me know. We're going to finish up that Turkey series this week, and then we're going to move on to the 30 Years' War from Extra History, so be watching for that as well. Thanks.